Back in 2009, in our early days at Google, we started working on self-driving cars. Today, we're called Waymo, and our fully self-driving cars are on the road. They use a range of technology we've built from the ground up to understand the world around them and get you where you need to go. You're about to see how it all works and what it feels like to ride in our car. As it drives, Waymo uses LiDAR, which sends out millions of laser beams per second to build up a detailed picture of the world all 360 degrees around it. It also uses radar to detect how far away objects are and their speed. And high-resolution cameras detect visual information, like whether a traffic signal is red or green. It then combines all that data to understand the world around it. For example, in this fraction of a second, it knows exactly where it is on the road. It can also identify everything around it in full 360 degrees, and then predict what those things might do next. And it doesn't just do that for the objects you and I can see. It can do that for things up to 3 football fields away. What makes everything you can see right now possible is experience. Waymo has already self-driven millions of miles on complicated city streets, and it's constantly learning from every single mile it drives. With all that knowledge, it can plan a safe path ahead. In this instance, giving that cyclist enough room to cycle past us, and also looking out for that pedestrian on the sidewalk. And when it comes to making decisions, this is a good example of how Waymo doesn't just take into account your safety. It also makes sure that both you and the people around you feel secure and at ease. So now that you know how Waymo works, it's time to take your first ride in one of our cars. Take a look around. You're now riding in a fully self-driving car. Some things might immediately stand out. The fact that there's no one in the driver's seat, no one turning the wheel, and the screens, which show you what the car is seeing and the route it's taking. But you might also notice that the ride feels a lot like being driven in a regular car. And that's the way it should feel. All this technology, which allows Waymo to see, identify, predict, and plan, should make an extraordinary ride feel completely ordinary and create a very normal journey that simply gets you from A to B, safe and sound. And while it does all that, all you have to do is sit back, relax, and enjoy the ride.
I would like to pass on my thanks to Mark for hosting this event today in a rather unusual manner. I'd also like to recognize the custodians of this land, both past, present, and of the future, and acknowledge their connection to this land for many, many years. What we just saw was Waymo. Waymo is part of the Alphabet Group, and it is a driverless car solution that is now live in 2 cities in the US. You can get a rideshare experience, not too dissimilar to an Uber, where you can call a car and it will turn up without a driver in it and take you to your destination. Things that we saw in the past as things that we thought were in the Jetsons are now things that are real. So what I'd like to cover is a couple of things today, really talking about innovation and the way that we can take innovation to transform businesses, and just give you a bit of exposure to the way that Google approaches those particular challenges. And I think the first question we always need to ask ourselves is innovation a process, or is it a culture, or is it a blend of the two? And we'll give you an exposure to how Google approaches it and may help you define how that could be appropriate in your industry, in the rail industry. And there's a huge amount of innovation goes on, and a lot of that can't be seen. Some of the things that we are doing obviously are very visible, and a lot of the innovation you're doing in the rail industry is invisible, and that is part of the objective. When Sergey and Larry first created Google, they came up with this concept that they did not want Google to be a normal business. They wanted it to be a business that challenged, always looked at something different, took on very significant challenges. And they introduced this concept called 10x. And 10x is a foundational principle inside the Google mentality. 10x is something when, as I look for new members of my team, I actually interview for. I actually interview for this concept of Googliness, and it's this concept of 10x. So, what is 10x? 10x thinking is all about coming up with radical solutions to what we consider to be huge problems. That if we implement well, if we develop in the right way, if we focus on the right outcomes, we'll deliver 10x improvement to the way things are currently done. So if you take that foundational principle back to what Google Search really started out to do, which was to document and create and get all the data from all the world and make that globally available to users in an accessible manner. I think we can see at the time back in the late 90s, that was something that couldn't be conceived. And yet today we take it for granted. The simplicity of the search bar and how that then provides information. That was the principle of 10x thinking. So we've established that as a foundational principle inside Google. What I want to do is explore just a little bit of how that comes to bear in some of the other things that we're doing. But let's just understand why 10x thinking is critical. Astro Teller, who's part of the Google X business, which is our incubated business that started businesses like Waymo, describes it in this manner. If you want cars to run for 50 miles per gallon, sorry, we're talking American numbers here, fine, you can retool the car a little bit. We can tweak it, we can evolve it. But if you look at the problem in a different way and you change your perspective on it, and you were told that you had to run on a gallon of petrol for 500 miles, you'd have to start the problem all over again. You'd have to look at it in a fundamentally different way, because there is no effective way to tweak the way we do things today to get that sort of output. And I'd like to acknowledge other organizations that are doing that. If you think about what SpaceX is doing today with the way that they are returning rockets, the way that they have now reduced the cost of sending a rocket into orbit. In the early days of the Apollo missions, about 1.2 to 1.5 billion every launch. Now each launch is around about $95 million. And of course, some of that is cost and some of that is the effectiveness of technology, but it's a foundational principle change. And they are actually launching rockets that have actually returned to Earth 6 times. So they're reusing it. Again, a retooling, a rethinking of that 10x model. So once we've established what is 10x and what are the principles of it, it's really about identifying those huge challenges, those huge problems, and then looking at the radical solutions and finding the breakthrough technology. And it's that intersection of those 3 elements that allow us to identify where we spend time. There are absolutely huge challenges which require radical solutions, but the technology is not there to deliver that yet. There's great breakthrough technology which applies to a radical solution, but it doesn't really resolve a massive problem. And we've all seen different examples of that. That intersection is the piece that at Google and Alphabet and inside Google X, we spend a lot of time focusing our attention to. So we call these things moonshots in Google. It's the kind of the rhetoric we get behind as we look at our organization and we look at the challenges our customers are applying and see how we can help them. So let's just explore what those moonshots are focused on. The number one thing is to focus on the user. I think what was really interesting to me about that video was the sort of, and I'm going to synthesize what was said, is this drive, this ride share is completely normal. And yet, of course, it's not normal because there's no driver in front of me. There's nobody trying to have a conversation with me, which you might miss. But for the user, it should be, the experience is totally normal. The car drives in a very predictable manner. It slows to a halt in a predictable manner. It accelerates in a predictable manner. It misses an obstacle in a predictable manner. If that isn't achieved, then the user will not adopt the experience. So this is a foundational, this is the keystone of everything we do, is we've got to focus on the user. So you have to think about that 10x within that context. So naturally, when you think about the user, you've got to think about three elements. And these are the three components that we typically try and break down once we've identified the user and the experience we're trying to create. You've got to build an emotional connection. You've got to understand the user. You've got to get close to them. If you're too far away, if you're not looking at it within their lens and you're looking at it from the technical lens, or you're trying to get to the solution too quickly, then you lose the opportunity to create something that will get adopted and evolved over time very quickly. And then, of course, once you've understood the emotional connection, it's then the next stage, which is how do I make that a seamless experience? And for technology, that's relatively straightforward, in the sense that we're talking about code. You're dealing with rail networks, which have got fixed elements inside them, and you've got some constraints around regulation. But how does that seamless experience allow a user to perform or get what they need from the solution or the situation? And I think the piece that we would say is you've got to use data. And I was really intrigued to look at the other keynote speakers that are going to come through the day, and each of them are going to talk about the importance of data today to drive decisions and allow you to make the decisions around innovations and how you're impacting things. So there are simple tweaks. We experiment every day seamlessly with just changing subtle things inside our technology and our products. And then we see the results. We look at telemetry across the board. And then we make the decisions as to whether that was a great idea or whether we need to tweak it slightly. And things that are maybe not even noticeable to the user, but we're driving data, decision, insights every day. And I think that's the foundational change that we're seeing. And we'll talk a little bit about that. And technology is allowing us to think about data as a driving factor. So we've built the emotional connection, we've given them a seamless experience, and we're using data that allows us to round trip to know that we are driving those emotional connections, because the data will tell us if we're not succeeding. So then with 10x, this is probably where the challenge comes. You have to take a long-term bet. And in the commercial world we all live in, that's a really difficult thing to do in certain industries. And we're all dealing with requirements of reporting our numbers on a regular basis, and they've got short-term risk requirements, but these are long-term bets. And certainly as an infrastructure providers such as yourselves, you understand long-term. You understand the importance of putting in infrastructure that will build for the future. And the rail networks are great examples of that. But then you've got to adopt that into rapid experimentation. Really quick experimentation. Hard in an infrastructure game, much easier in a technology game. But that experimentation needs to allow for failure. I think probably the big thing that we actually celebrate and we give awards to each quarter is the big failures. And it sounds really bizarre, I get it. They're not failures that risk life. Let's be clear about that. But they're failures because from a failure we can learn. When we get a massive cloud outage, which occurs, right? There can be lots of reasons why that might occur. We actually go and we investigate and we learn, and we want that honest feedback, because that has to align back to the product offering and to the brand truth, which is we're trying to do things that are big and ambitious, and failure will only will be part of that if you're going to push the boundaries. And there's a beautiful SpaceX YouTube video if you want to watch about them trying to launch and sort of trying to land their rockets. You should watch it. It's about 4 minutes long, but they're learning every time there's a failure. So once you've got those foundational problems, then we go into a process. So you've got the cultural elements at the beginning, and then you do need a process underneath it. And then you've got your big picture thinking, you've got your iterating and developing in the ideas, and then you go into refinement and into prototyping. And then that takes us into our incubated businesses that we talked about inside the Google X incubators. And then the ones that are successful go out, such as Waymo that we saw a moment ago. So we have these 10 mindsets, and some of them we've sort of explored already, but these are the principles that we keep coming back to. Aim for 10x, established. Fall in love with the problem. You've got to really want to know the problem. You've got to really have passion that there's a problem and you understand it. Make contact with the real world early. What that means is don't sit in your room and think you've got this all resolved. You've got to actually go out there and see it and be prepared to be challenged that maybe your perspective isn't 100% right. Fuel the creativity with lots of different viewpoints. You know, diversity is probably one of the most important elements. We've just come out of a 3-week process in our business globally around diversity and the importance of diverse thinking and diverse teams. And that's cultural, that's gender, that's all sorts of different considerations and different thinking styles. Then we've got this interesting one called Tackle the Monkey First. And what we mean by that is if you wanted to put a monkey on top of a pedestal and teach it to recite Shakespeare, for example, the easy thing to do is to go and design the pedestal, because that's the easy thing to do. Whereas actually you've got to go and spend your money and your time on teaching the monkey how to recite Shakespeare. The pedestal is something you'll resolve later on. So tackle the hard problems first. Often we tackle the simple problems first because we feel that gives us momentum. But you've got to spend the money on the hard problem. Embrace the failure for the learning. The failure will tell you where things need to evolve and how it can be possible. The chaos that's going to be created is just natural, and you should embrace that and actually accelerate it and create that within the diverse teams you've got. And this idea of love version 0 crap, and the picture there of a hat with some sort of thing, an antenna on it, it doesn't matter. Don't get your solution to 80% before you start to design it. Design it really, really early. Make all the mistakes, all those learnings, because you will find you get to an answer quicker. Shifting your perspective is all about looking at things in a different way and then taking the long-term view. So when we think about that, I just wanted to give you a couple of examples, and then there are a couple of videos as well, of some of the things that we're doing inside the Google X business to tackle some of these problems or some of these examples. So right now in Australia, we think that we've got, everyone's got internet access. I mean, thank goodness that we do for the pandemic that we've just experiencing. But there are 4 billion people, 50% of the population of this world have no access to telephony or data or internet services. That's not because they don't have phones. It's not because they can't afford them. There are no services in those remote locations. We've got this amazing sort of generation of renewable energy, but how do we store that for when we actually need it? It may not be that we need that energy for another couple of days. How do we store that? A massive problem with a massive opportunity for more sustainable energy if we can resolve that. 500 million people are affected through mosquito-borne diseases globally. The biggest killer every year for many, many years in the past. How do we resolve some of those problems? And then some places can't even get renewable energy of any sort or any energy of any sort. How do we create that in a simple way and give people access to it? So I'll give you a bit of an insight into 4 of the Google X industries that have tried to resolve these. The first one is Loon. Loon is an internet capability that is being delivered through satellite services in low orbit balloons. We've deployed these, or Loon has deployed these into scenarios such as places that have been affected by typhoons or massive weather events, and they've lost all power. And by putting a low orbit balloon system able to provide internet access to people, which is vital when you're trying to reconnect people to their families and also to the services to be able to recover from the situation. In Mozambique right now with Vodacom, which is part of the Vodafone group, we've got balloons running, providing internet access to whole parts of Mozambique that have never had any telephony services before. Malta is an example of an organization that is capturing renewable energy inside salt. And they're capturing that in molten salt. So molten salt, They're capturing the energy that's coming out of the excess energy that's coming out of renewable sources, and then they're taking the heat out of it, and they're cooling the salt. And then maybe a week later or a couple of days later, when they need that energy, they recombine the heat with the salt and release the energy back into the grid, trying to make grids sustainable. And that is a business that's up and running today. Verily is part of our healthcare services that is looking and addressing things like the challenge with mosquito-borne diseases. And actually, through COVID, has been providing all sorts of different solutions for COVID and disease identification. Makani is an interesting one, and I put it in there because it actually has proved to be a failure. Makani is a kite-based system. You can see an example of a kite. It's not the type that we have, that we put on the beach, but this is a kite that flies and it generates energy through the propellers, and then it runs a cord down and makes energy available. It was actually spun out, and Shell started working on this, but actually in 2020, that business was shut down because we're just not ready to do that. The problem actually wasn't big enough, and the technology is not ready to be able to do that. Again, we learn from that. The other examples are all things that are up and running today. And what I wanted to do is give you just one that's close to home, and I'll run a little video. There's a business called Wing, and in Canberra and Logan today, you can have coffees, hot chicken delivered to you, and the video will just give you a little bit of an insight as to what's going on there. If we can roll the Wing video, please.
I'd like to give a big thank you to everybody for welcoming us to the community, and a big thank you to all of our customers and local businesses who joined us over the past 12 months. We've really enjoyed delivering to you. Whether it be being able to order that morning coffee or parts for a DIY project that you're doing whilst working from home, you've definitely made drone delivery a part of your everyday lives.
What happens when you're in isolation due to the coronavirus? It's nearly Easter and you have Wing that can actually deliver some chocolate. No standing in line, no worrying about being sold out. Thanks to Wing.
Oh my gosh, these two are so excited. Thank you. Open it and have a look.
It sounded so exciting. Deliveries in just a matter of minutes. It's the coolest thing since the Jetsons. When I first heard about it, I was excited. I told a lot of people and customers, they all shared my enthusiasm.
When our customer find out they can order sushi and delivery by a drone, our customers think this is a mission impossible.
I thought it was quite an innovation, something different, something new. Customers were quite ecstatic with the thought of groceries dropping from the sky.
One story that sticks in my mind is when we first saw the drone delivery happen to a customer there, and we saw how excited her little daughter was by receiving her red velvet cupcakes via drone.
For me, it was awesome, and every day I work over there, I still get the same feeling every time. I feel like a little kid.
Thank you!
Thank you. And maybe next year, we'll have a wider network and we'll be able to deliver everybody coffees for the start of the PWI event. Just a great example, live, happening. Do we want to be a drone delivery company? Probably not. Why are we doing it? There's a huge amount of data, and you're just learning about how do you deliver or how do you control low-flying objects and ensure that they don't crash into each other? How do we learn things about geothermal? How do we learn things about the environments we fly through? So many other reasons why this would be a good solution. So let's just take that back to what are some of the practical things that we're seeing inside customers, the likes of customers that I'm working with. And we typically talk to organizations about digital transformation. And I think, you know, it's an overused word, and it's got all sorts of different people define it differently. So I just want to break down what it means to us. It means changing, evolving, going beyond. It then talks about shaping and framing and developing a culture. And then it talks about the process and the result you're trying to create. So those are the three elements that we would typically look at when we work inside using technology to build a transformation. And what we know to be true today is data is the new currency. You're going to hear about this throughout your presentations, whether that's from Siemens, whether it's from TradingBots, whether it's from other presenters. Data is the new currency. The wealthiest companies in the world are data companies. Google essentially is a data utility. That's what we do. And that cloud technology has really enabled us to do that, and that connectivity. And that's why those 4 billion people need to get access to that information, because they don't get education in the same way. They don't access the services in the same way as other people. So they are underserved. So we have to resolve that. Data is the critical component. And what I've tried to do here is just give you some insights as to the way we see some of the industries. I didn't have a rail industry example, but I thought I'd use energy and automotive. And there are 3 areas of data that we collect and we encourage our customers to think about. The user data, focus on the customer, on the user, the stuff that's inside your organization, and then the corporate data itself. And the way you collaborate that and bring it together will indicate the value that you can bring and the user experience you can have. Similarly, with automotive, we know that there's so much telemetry on inside cars today. How do we make that available so that people can understand what is the best car for them to buy? How do we make that a better prediction so that we get the right car in the right place at the right time for the purchaser? Again, another example of that. So I'll give 2 examples of organizations that I've been involved with, and I was actually talking to AES in the US yesterday. They are using drones in their wind farm management, because one of the problems they've got is that they have to send people up the turbine to go and look at it and do maintenance. So they're using drone technology, and you can see a little instance there on the right, in the right-hand graphic there with the red box. So what the drone has identified is a lightning strike. And then we overlay some technology with AI that will define whether that is something that needs addressing now or it can actually be resolved later. And they've actually saved over 57,000 hours of hazardous work. Sending people up there is costly. You know this better than I do. The health and safety requirements for anybody doing maintenance, if you can reduce that, the efficiency is improved. And often people go up there and do maintenance that is not necessarily of a priority. So a good example of some simplicities there and cost savings. Inside your own example, inside rail, we're working with Talgo Trains out of Portugal, and they are actually streaming 2,000 events per second out of each train to make determination on maintenance of a train. So they're saving hundreds of hours of maintenance schedules because they're getting the data in real time to enable them to determine predictive maintenance versus sort of responsive maintenance. Examples that you would be very familiar with. So 2 examples. The last video I'd like to show you is around Google Glass. And Google Glass is something that we introduced probably about 5 years ago, and it was a fantastic failure because it was positioned as a product that people would want to have in their social environment. It actually transpires people, unlike Google executives, don't want to know who's walking towards them, and people are concerned about their privacy. But what we've actually found is there are much better implementations of that inside industry. And I'd just like to roll the last video to give you an indication of that.
Every business in the world has problems to solve. You don't have to look for those.
Are there more efficiencies to be gained? Is there a better way to do this process? And when the needs of the customers are rising in complexity, you're being attacked from both sides.
Innovation is critical to healthcare. We have a tremendous opportunity to make it better for our patients. And solutions like Glass help us do that.
Throughout the process of developing Glass Enterprise Edition 2, we spent a lot of time listening. We worked with our partners and with our customers to figure out what they wanted. Glass is a hands-free device for smarter and faster hands-on work. It provides the information that an employee needs in the periphery of their line of sight. So it doesn't come in the way of their actual work environment.
Glass has made ICO a safer company because you have 2 hands to do your job. whether they're climbing on and off units or trying to do something in the field.
What has become commonplace is physicians spending more time staring at the computer screen than spending time face-to-face with patients. With glass, what we started seeing is patients saying to us, my doctor is spending more time with me.
Glass has allowed for a lot of unique ways to collaborate that haven't been possible before. The biggest is immediately getting expert advice from somebody who might be around the world.
Being able to provide what they're seeing at their perspective helps do a very, very expedited triage to help bring our customer back online sooner.
We've been using glass in production since about 2016. We had about a 30% reduction in processing time, and we had a 50% reduction in training time. And that one was just monumental. We weren't even looking for that when we did it.
A typical doctor spends about 2 hours per day writing notes about the visits that they conducted. And because I have glass typing that up for me in real time, I am not worrying about going back 4 hours later, trying to remember all the details of the visits. It'll help us be better doctors.
Whether it be manufacturing or field service or healthcare, they're all doing things with their hands. And by looking across all these different industries, we're able to find the unique things that we can provide value for.
Glass is a tool that is as simple as it is powerful. That's incredibly helpful. We underestimated the impact that that would have.
It's a tool that doesn't replace people. It allows people to be smarter, faster, better at what they're actually doing at the job.
And really it comes back to that question of focusing on the user. What does the user want to do? They want to use both hands. Often that's a challenging thing to be able to achieve. So just to wrap it up, we believe there are 4 foundations for a culture of innovation. We've got all the other guidelines. You've got to be curious. You've got to have agency. You've got to want to go out there and be independent and test for things and have the authority to do that. You've got to be able to collaborate with those diverse teams, and you've got to be comfortable taking risk. You have got to be comfortable with the failure. You've got to see the failure as a bigger learning than the success. Thank you very much. Thank you for all the work you do on looking after our railways and ensuring that our communities can get around, especially during difficult times like this. So I thank you for that. And Mark, thank you for allowing us to come and talk a little bit about the things that you thought maybe in the future that are perhaps a little bit closer than you thought. Thank you very much.
Thank you. Thanks, Gary. Excellent presentation. A very unique presentation for the PWI, but the committee actually thought this was an excellent sort of segue into the theme for this convention. A couple of things you raised, you talked about the focus for Google on the user. I suppose the railways are starting to get very much focused on the customer now, and that's the change over the last probably 10 years, very much focused around the customer. You talk about things being seamless. Again, as a focus on the customer in rail, we're starting to move very much to this, how do we move from one mode to another in a seamless way. So that was great. I love that bit about the moonshot and the mindset, some of those concepts. What Google X is doing, we talked about that earlier, the kite or the balloon going up there to provide access for internet. Just some amazing concepts. I think the last one that really got my interest was the bit about glass. Like straight away in railways, I'm sure we can all see some significant benefits of that. So can I thank you on behalf of the PWI and everyone that's out there that was watching. Thanks for setting the scene and opening our convention with an excellent keynote address and really giving us the challenge to look at what we're doing with innovation. So thank you very much.